Yo, what is up? You have found We Like the Blazers. I am Brandon Goldner, and with me, as always, it is Ryan Whitledge. Ryan, what's up, man?
Not a whole lot. I can actually wave. I have a clear camera. People may possibly see this. Yes, if I could just get that background music just that we have. If I could, I'm trying to listen to it in my head.
Dude, your camera looks fucking crispy. We are looking bright and shiny this Saturday morning. Yeah, how's your weekend begun so far?
Little fuzzy. It imbibed a little bit too much last night during that joyous Blazers win over the Lakers. So trusty little Powerade here to get me through it.
That's great, man. That was a huge win. And I don't know, like I said I was gonna let you drive this entire section, but I just regardless of how it happened, that was I think that was the biggest win of the season.
I thought we were supposed to piss all over it because there was no LeBron, there's no Schroeder, AD was at half strength, so it doesn't count as a win. I thought that's the process for the year.
I mean, if you follow me on Twitter at GolderPDX, you would know that I sort of poo-pooed it. The Blazers, they didn't look great. I thought they played about as poorly as they had since their road trip where they went 5-1. However, where I landed on this after thinking about it was like, look, if you're going to have like a less than perfect game, then hey, a less than perfect game that results in a win in the most crucial game of the year against your longtime rival is actually not so bad.
Yeah, and that one was super important. I told you had that down as the loss. I told you not to worry about that. The one I had down as the worry meter proved to be wrong.
So we were both wrong.
We were both wrong, so nothing new there. Yeah, it turns out a tornado warning is what felled the team in, but I'm fine with that. But now we
trap
sit here.
Game with the tornado warning. It's always a tornado trap game.
Exactly. And so now we sit here. We got what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games left. Blazers are firmly locked in the 6th seed. I believe 1 game behind the Mavericks and 1 game up on now the Lakers, who, by the way, I find it great. There's so much flip-flopping with this whole play-in tournament thing. I mean, LeBron last year is like, oh, it's great. Let him duke it out, whatever. Which in his mind, he's like, yeah, sure. Whoever we're going to play in the first round, let's get them all tired and worn out.
Yeah, you know.
And now that he's looking at being in it, he's like, this thing fucking sucks. Whoever thought of this shit needs to be fired.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't heard Luka or Mark Cuban say anything about it lately since the Mavs have been pretty much on fire. The Mavs are playing better without Porzingis than they were with him, which is a little bit disconcerting. And we are going to get to our awesome guest, Ben Golliver, which I probably should have said right off the top. But before we do that, we're going to talk playoff stuff. So yeah, 5 games left. How are you? And you said it too. The Blazers now they cannot fall out of the play-in tournament, so they're at least there. And the other thing to mention is they're a game up on the Lakers, but because they have the tiebreaker, they're effectively 2 games up on the Lakers. But have you heard this funky, if there's a 3-way tie between the Blazers, the Lakers, and Mavs? Have you heard about how these rules work? It's pretty dumb.
Yeah, and I always forget that the only thing that they changed with the tiebreakers or playoff seeding was just the automatic home court if you won your division. But yeah, the winning your division gets you a tiebreaker over other teams, even if they're
who
not
have beaten you
in your division. Yeah.
But so the Blazers have, if there were an individual tie with the Mavericks, the Blazers would win. If there were an individual tie with the Lakers, the Blazers would win. But if it's a 3-way tie with the Blazers, Mavs, and Lakers, then the Mavs win because they won their division. That is, you know what? This is Adam Silver's, small market bias at work once again, helping out Dallas. I just think it's a stupid rule. That's all.
Yeah, and I agree, and partly because too, we're getting into now the time of everyone trying to figure out, what's the best playoff matchup and whatnot. Which, by the way, that's one of the hidden genius parts behind that play-in tournament is because you have Phoenix and Utah right now jockeying for that 1 and 2. It seems every night they're trading on who's number 1, who's number 2, and in years prior you could maybe see in that kind of battle, like if one team really wanted to match up with another team, that they could, we'll let a game slip here or there to drop so that they could get the 2nd and play the 7th, However, you don't get that this year. You have it's literally they're looking, going, well, there's a pool of 4 teams. We don't know who the hell we're going to play. That middle of the West is a little more. What are your thoughts? Do you have a preferred playoff matchup that you want to see? Should the Blazers be hunting for anybody else as much as they can?
No, the Blazers should not be getting tricky with their playoff position. Let the chips fall where they may. The Blazers should be gunning for as good of a seed as they can get. Having said that, there are a couple teams that I wouldn't mind seeing over some other teams. And like, as soon as I say this, I'm sure that once they get matched up with one of those teams, they're just going to have their asses handed to them. I mean,
Pelicans all over again.
Exactly. I mean, I remember not so long ago when the Blazers were going to meet the Warriors in the conference finals, and I was thinking, well, geez, the Warriors don't have KD, so, maybe the Blazers, and then they got swept. So my first team, and I'm not looking at the standings right now. I don't know how it can switch around, but I think it's still possible that they could meet the Denver Nuggets, if I'm not mistaken, because if the Blazers can get up to 5th and the Nuggets are 4th, then that'd be a 5-4 matchup with Denver. And look, I know Denver's been doing really well, but they don't have their second best player. They don't have Jamal Murray. And I think that in the playoffs, when you're able to scheme against a team again and again, and look, no one's going to stop Jokic. We all know that. He's going to be the MVP for a reason. But that would be one team I would look to, is that they're missing their second best player, and you just can't ignore that.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally, I can't stand the playoff matchup or trying to pick your opponent or anything like that. It drives me absolutely nuts. I mean, I gave up on that ever since the Pelican series, when I thought that was a great effing matchup, and then just absolutely embarrassed. And there's the thing I look at, like, the Clippers terrify me because the one weakness that the Blazers have is the ability to guard athletic wings, and that is, I've just described the entire Clippers roster as athletic wings. You have a team of them. That's going to be your worst. Obviously you touched on, nobody's going to stop Jokic. Denver intrigues me because there's a history there. After that Blazers Western Conference Finals run, for the most part, the core pieces or the important players are still there. And so I'd be curious how Jokic is going to want to react to that. That'd be his chance for revenge, to just absolutely embarrass the Blazers. Nurkic loves playing against Jokic. It's normally when he plays his best ball. And those are pretty much like your only options for where you're going to get. And as it stands right now,
Did you didn't mention the Suns, though, did you?
See, but...
I mean, I think the Blazers could play any of those top 4 seeds. The Blazers could be anywhere between 5 and 8.
Okay, if you want to get into who I would think, again, with that whole thing about lack of athletic wings, then the Suns are fantastic because they don't really have athletic wings. And Chris Paul has held them together. They're great shooters and whatnot. But I don't mention them because in order to get the Suns or the Jazz, you have to get into the play-in and not get your extra 4 days off. So it's kind of one of those things of like, all right, you gotta win in the first round and advance and hope you see them, and then so it's just whatever with them. Denver and LA are the options. That's pretty much it. All
right, well that's fair. I mean, I want to pick at the Suns thing a little bit. I have seen a lot of people who I respect basically say, bring on the Suns, that'd be great. And I understand that a lot of that is coming from, yes, they have Chris Paul, who is the most veteran of veterans, but then they have a lot of young players who don't have any playoff experience. And I think what people are saying is essentially, and I generally agree with this, that history is the best indicator of what may happen in the future. So if a team has playoff experience, again, the schematics are different. You're not able to surprise teams. It's just a playoff series is different from regular season games. And so if what people are saying is, absent that experience, then bring on the Suns, that's fair, but what I would push back on is it doesn't necessarily mean that your team will be unsuccessful just because you haven't been to the playoffs before. I get that it's easier to say that a team like the Blazers have a decent amount of playoff experience at this point. The Nuggets do, the Jazz do, the Clippers, it's like, and I get that, but I wouldn't necessarily dismiss the Suns.
Everyone in the West outside of the Kings and Timberwolves has decent playoff experience.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and it's, I don't know. I'm trying. I haven't seen. Granted, they're playing better as of late, and that's always important.
Let's talk about that.
That it's always important heading into the playoffs because, like, I find it so funny that everyone's like, "Oh, well, I hope that this can," or "I haven't seen much that'll change my mind and whatnot." But then when they talk about the Lakers, they're like, "Well, as long as they can just get a couple games before the playoffs to get right." There is something to finding your rhythm at the right time and peaking at the right time, and we've seen it before with the Blazers where they've peaked too early and then it flames out in the playoffs. So hopefully this can be continued sustained success.
Well, let's talk about leading up to the playoffs. So you said one thing I wanted to hit on, which is the Lakers. Look, at this point, I just said, like, history is the best indicator of what's going to happen in the future. I am not dismissing LeBron and his ability to literally turn a switch for himself and his entire team. He's done it way too many times for me to say that this is the year it won't happen. I get that he has a high ankle sprain. It's been bothering him. I get that AD does not really look like himself in most of these games, although he did pretty well against the Blazers.
He's made a glass. Every time he touches the court, he falls down, he gets hurt.
I'm just saying that, like, I'm not falling for this, like, LeBron is done thing until it happens. It's the same thing as what people were saying about the Spurs not making the playoffs until they don't make the playoffs, and then they didn't make the playoffs. But, like, so that's one thing. Here's the other thing. We talked last week about how I was feeling about the Blazers. They'd gone on a little win streak, and I think you made the analogy of, like, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid, but, like, I have it in the snifter, and I'm, like, swirling it around, and, like, I can hear the ice clinking against the glass. Ryan, at this point, like, the cup is about to reach my lips. Like, the cup will reach my lips, and I will take a little tiny sip of that Kool-Aid if the Blazers beat the Spurs tonight. Here's why. They looked really good during the road trip, and like I said, I thought that they played probably their worst game of the last 6 or 7 games against the Lakers yesterday.
Yeah.
And guess what? They still won. Like, AD is still an incredible player. He had a really great game, and they still won despite, I don't have the stats in front of me. I think Rocco went for like 1 for 11 or some shit. Like, there were some spots the Blazers could easily clean up and look a lot better tonight. I know that they played a lot of minutes. I know, like, Dame and CJ played nearly 40 minutes, and Nurk, I think, played more minutes than he had since he's come back. But if the Blazers beat the Spurs tonight, I am going to take a tiny, polite little, introductory sip to that Kool-Aid. I think that they may be able to do something in the playoffs. This will be the corner turning point for me.
Liar. You are picking up that entire 5-gallon Gatorade bucket of Kool-Aid and dumping it over your head.
No.
Yes.
It's like CJ said when he got drenched with water. It's a regular season, bro. I just, like, I had been saying that, like, I was super skeptical of the Blazers' ability to make any noise in the playoffs, and I wanted to really take my time with being, tricked back into it. And, like, again, another analogy, which I appreciate, you were like, they're not turning a corner, they're going in a circle, so it always feels like they're turning a corner.
Yeah.
What do you think? Like, so if the Blazers lose tonight, that's something else. Let's say that they beat the Spurs. Like, how will you be feeling about the Blazers' ability to win a playoff series and to be a threat in a second round series? Let's make that the benchmark.
Not going to change. Not going to change. I've been here enough times before where it's literally, if you want me to have positive and optimistic feelings about the Blazers winning a playoff series, that's not going to kick in until they win a playoff series this year.
I think that's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. No. You have to make a prediction. You have to get on the record and say, so basically, even if the Blazers, if they blew out their next 6 games by 30 points apiece, you're not going to be like, well, I predict that, like your thinking is going to have to change, right? Like, not saying that's going to happen. I'm just like, you have to get on the record and make a prediction. Okay, that's it. I'm holding you to it.
All right. What do you want me to predict?
So as of right now, because it's been a week since we recorded, they've looked pretty good the last week. My cat just jumped off of the cat tree. It was pretty nice moves are super athletic. So based on what you've seen over the last week, you feel the same as you did the previous week, or do you feel any different, any more optimistic at all about, again, let's put it at the Blazers being competitive in a second round series? Like, do you feel any differently about that. And it's okay if you don't, but I just want to pick at it.
No, I don't.
Okay, that's fair.
I have about the same level of optimism and skepticism as I did last week. So, we'll see how they do, especially depending on what, Utah, Phoenix, and Denver are doing to finish out the season, if they're resting guys or whatnot. But if those three aren't just completely in rest mode to end the season by the time the Blazers play them, and the Blazers win those games, and it's not, come from behind last second Dame victories, my confidence level will skyrocket, and I will start planning the parade. I will start mapping it out. I will figure out where the socially distanced pods can be set up down Broadway, but we'll get there. But I don't know. I'm right now. You're getting ready to take the sip of the Kool-Aid.
Just a sip. Just a little sip. Right
now, I mean, I poured some Kool-Aid in the glass and it's sitting over on the counter. I'll get to it eventually.
Okay,
that's where I'm at.
That I think that's okay. So let me. And I know we don't want to go too long, but I wanted to ask about, the Blazers. Terry Stotts has really tightened up his rotations, right? So we're seeing now it's an 8-person rotation. It's the starting 5, so it's Dame, CJ, Rocco, Powell, and Nurk, and then you have Cantor, Melo, and Simons coming off the bench. You had a weird, 1 minute of Rondé Hollis-Jefferson coming in as a defensive switch at the end of the game against the Lakers.
That was a fun experiment.
That was weird. It didn't work the first time, and maybe it worked the second time. But so, I mean, how do you? This is something that. That I think, where did I ask this? So we've been using the Locker Room app. I've been jumping onto pods and asking questions. I think it was Mike Richmond again in the Locked On Blazers podcast. It was his podcast. I asked him what he thought about Terry Stotts tightening his rotations so much and whether maybe he should be giving other players time, because depending on the matchup, you might want to have Derek Jones Jr. play some more minutes, right? Like maybe you want to switch it up. How do you feel about that? Are you feeling okay about the rotations being tightened up so much? Because the other thing, too, is that Dame maybe is not getting as much rest as you might hope. So I'm just curious your thoughts on this.
With Dame not getting as much rest as I might hope, I'm perfectly fine with that. I said it last week that the big thing for me is if they can avoid the play-in, they basically get 4 or 5 days off, depending on when their first-round playoff series would be. So it's not going to be like what we saw last year, where they had to fight and scrap and play balls to the wall to get to the play-in tournament, to then continue to completely ball out, to then be wasted by the playoffs. That's what you want to avoid. You don't want to put in all this effort and time and work and shorten rotation and whatnot to end up in the play-in, because then you're definitely going to burn out there. But if you can do it to get that time of rest, I think that's fine. As far as the rotations go, I'm happy with them shortening it up, because now guys know their roles, know their responsibilities, know their minutes, and it's the core guys. Matt Moore wrote something for the Action Network, and he was talking about things that are super important to look for in the playoffs and whatnot. And one of the things he was talking about, and it kind of, even though the Rondé Hollis-Jefferson thing last night with the Lakers was out of place, it kind of gave me a little bit of hope as far as how Stotts may possibly adjust to matchups or whatnot, because Matt was talking about in that article that, you don't need to be a top 10 defensive team in order to win in the playoffs. But what you see from those top defenses is their ability to mix it up. I mean, you saw that with Nick Nurse in Toronto. I mean, throwing out box and one and random zones and whatnot. And your ability to adjust on the fly on defense is way more important than just how the Lakers typically play defense or whatever. So as long as Terry's okay with switching it up, situationally playing a Derek Jones Jr. or Rondé Hollis-Jefferson or whatnot, I could care less about him, those guys not necessarily getting a run now. No,
that's I think that's a totally clear-eyed view of it. And you mentioned the defense. This is something that we had talked a little bit about it, but I didn't realize that the starting lineup has been this good in 280 minutes so far. Shout out to @503 Blazers fans for this little nugget on Twitter this morning. In 280 minutes this season, the starting lineup of Dame, CJ, Norm, Rocco, and Nurk, they rank 5th in offense, 1st in net rating, and Ryan, first in defense. So that is, I know it's at 280 minutes is a relatively small sample size, but that's not nothing. I mean, if you think about these players playing 30-ish minutes a game, right? Together, it's probably a little bit less than that based on the subbing rotations. That's like 12, 13, 14 games when you put in the sub patterns. That's pretty impressive. And in the playoffs, your players, your best players, will be playing more minutes. So that lineup specific ranking really does matter more once you get to the playoffs in particular. That's really unbelievable.
Yeah. And it's, I think it was just in the month of April, Anthony Simons was actually the team's best defender. So you're seeing guys that are stepping up and taking the charge. And, a lot of that does come from Dame, ever since he basically said it starts with me and I've got to give more of a shit out there on the court on that end, and then you see him, picking up, star players like he did with Tatum and whatnot.
Diving on the ground and stuff. Yeah,
exactly. And we saw that, and so as we've been saying, like all year, like, hey, the Blazers have this, great situational, like, last 3 minutes of a game defense. Why the hell can't they do that for an entire game? Well, now we're starting to see them do it an entire game, and they're not needing that in just the last 2 minutes or whatnot.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's completely true. We had a couple of questions here from Twitter that I did want to get to before we maybe close it out and get to the interview with Ben. So let me start with this one. We have a second one that just came in. So the first one comes from Chris McKee. Shout out to Chris. We were homies in middle school. He asks, first of all, he talks about when the Blazers came to Corvallis in the mid 90s and the Charlotte Hornets came to town. Says he remembers Alonzo Mourning hanging from the rim at Gill. I wasn't there, but I have talked about the game in '99 when the Blazers showed up and Brian Grant stayed to write to give the autographs to people who were waiting for him. But Chris asks, Tap teaser Chris, he'll get what that means. He asks, what is your favorite era of Blazers logo? So I notice that, Ryan, you have the current iteration of their logo on your chest quite prominently right now.
Yes, I don't think it could be any bigger.
Literally, that could not be any bigger. And I'm sitting here not in my Blazers gear, which I really need to be mindful of that, especially when on video. What about you? What's your favorite era of Blazers logo?
I think give me early 2000s. When they kept it in that black little slanted triangle, and the Portland Trailblazers. I had one of those patches on one of my really cool, super cool jean jackets as a kid. When they were already phased out. But yeah, it's early 2000s. I like that. It was simple, sleek. And I for some reason that little stupid slanted triangle I don't know, that does it for me.
So you're not going to go with the alternate logo from the mid 2000s, the flames on the side. That was I don't know why they tried to go with that.
When you're growing up, everybody goes through a weird phase. Yeah. I feel as though that was the team's weird phase. That they tried to be punk, it didn't work. They pivoted super quick.
I actually, I think their logo redesign, the one that you're rocking right now, is actually pretty clean. They did a good job with that. For me, it's got to be just the classic logo that carried all the way through the early 90s. And I admit, like, maybe it's not so much the aesthetics of it, it's more the nostalgia that, like, that original logo is the logo, the vertical one that I remember most from when I was a kid and my formative years as a Blazers fan. So that's got to be it for me. We had another question. Let me I'm going to sneak this up on you because I didn't prep you for this.
Oh, great.
But
I quit.
At Justin_B_leak on Twitter asks, if you could choose just 2 of these 5 players to return next season, who would it be and why? He says purely for basketball, so ignore the salary cap. So 2 of these 5, and the 5 that he has are Enes Kanter, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, Derrick Jones Jr., Melo, and Harry Giles. Of those 5, Kanter, Jefferson, Jones, Melo, and Giles, which of those 2 would you want to return next season and why?
Kanter and Jefferson.
Okay. That's good.
Kanter is the best backup center in the league, and he's proven that if he needs to fill in for spot minute or fill in for an injured center, he's perfectly capable of doing it. And if it's regardless of salary, then freaking great because he'll probably want another $5, $6, $7 million a year next year. So bring him back. And then Jefferson, he's not Melo, so that gets him a win in my book.
By the way, breaking news from Casey Holdall, Melo is out for tonight's game against the Spurs with a right ankle sprain.
Oh, great.
So there you go. Well, maybe you'll get to see. That's actually interesting because Melo is in that 8-person rotation, right? Those minutes, it's 20 minutes, got to go somewhere.
Guarantee you Nas is getting that. Nas is probably going to get that. Let him run. I know Derek White's out for the Spurs, and it's great too that we're talking about the Spurs game because most people are probably going to listen to this tomorrow. So all of our takes about the Spurs will be horribly wrong and outdated. But and then with Jefferson, it's he's done okay for what his role is, and you saw that when he played with the Nets, and he's had moments here, and Terry's proven that he can have a trust with him for subbing him in for some defensive assignments here and there. So just that. Giles, it's still, I don't know what to think of him. He looks great when he's out there for 2.5 minutes running with third units, but
yeah, I'm intrigued by Giles too, but you're right. It's like he hasn't really played against starters.
Is it Giles or Giles?
I think that it's Giles. I say Giles. If it's Giles, then I am sorry. But I think it's Giles. I agree with you on Melo, and I want to appreciate Melo more now that he's coming to the end of his career. But
Tara got to you. She got to you.
Yeah, I mean, she kind of did. But look, I appreciate Tara. Team Mom on Twitter. She has the We Have a Take podcast and the Step Back Sisters podcast. Basically, look, we should be honoring / appreciating Melo's the end of his career, how he's evolved into a role player, despite the fact that sometimes he may frustrate me a little bit when he gets the ball and he backs down, and then takes a contested shot, maybe all too often, frankly. But I do think it's important to appreciate him where he is in this moment. And then I agree with you on Cantor. Where I may have a little bit of a quibble is between Derrick Jones Jr. and Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, just because Derrick Jones Jr., he's not playing, right? And I've said this before, I've been flamed for it on Twitter, that coaching genius Eric Spoelstra also didn't play Derrick Jones Jr. during the Heat's playoff run to the finals, and people were like, well, he was injured before the playoffs. I went through as much of the reporting as I could find, and there wasn't anything to suggest that he was having lingering effects from that injury or that was the reason why he wasn't in the rotation. It was a coaching choice, right? So, I think I agree with you on Cantor and Derrick Jones Jr. with the caveat that, he's just not playing right now, and the Blazers have been succeeding. So that's my take on it.
I can't appreciate Melo. I have to stay on brand. I've spent all year slandering him, and the more I slander him, the better he plays. So I gotta stick with it now. I'll appreciate it. I'll appreciate him after the season. I'll fill out my apology form then. Until then, stop sending them to me on Twitter. I will just immediately delete them, and if you hand them to me in person, I will light them on fire. So
I'm gonna mail some to you, some hard copies.
A sternly worded letter. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, so we lucked out, and we actually got a chance to talk with the Washington Post's Ben Golliver. I have long stated he is on my Mount Rushmore of writers. I love chatting with him. It's always great when he gives time, and he just wrote his first book. I say first book as if we know he's going to write a second one, but he probably will. But Bubbleball, talking about his time in the bubble. So without further ado, let's get Ben in here.
All right, our guest today is a reporter with the Washington Post. He's also the co-host of the Open Floor podcast and the Greatest of All Talk podcast, and author of the recently published book, Bubbleball, Inside the NBA's Fight to Save the Season, which I believe you can see over his left shoulder. It's the man, the myth, the legend, Ben Golliver. Ben, what's up, man?
Not too much. It's been a wild week. It's my first book, so it's just really been a whirlwind journey of a lot of first-time experiences. But I'm in a great mood, honestly. It's great to see this project to the finish line after what's been a really challenging year, I think, for everybody. And, I just sank myself into this project during the pandemic. And so the fact that it's actually out in the world in bookstores is awesome.
Yeah, I imagine it's got to be super surreal. And that's actually what I wanted to ask about first, was your experience in the bubble itself. Because I've followed you from before you went there, during and after. I've heard you talk on your own show and other shows, but there are moments in our life that before they happen, they seem unreal or impossible, or that thing could never happen. And after being in it for a while, I imagine you probably start to get a rhythm. It starts to feel kind of normal, right? Like you pick up on routines and like you start seeing and smelling and kind of feeling the same things in those routines. And then it's over, right? And so you've had this extraordinary thing happen, you get used to it, and now you're out of it. And I just wanted to ask you that for you, what has that process been like from before arriving and like everything going on in the world too with the pandemic? I mean, we were already in kind of an odd state, to actually being in the bubble for as long as you were. And now that you've been away from it, like how does that moment feel to you now? Does it feel surreal? Does it feel fake? I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that.
No, there was definitely a big time acclimation process, and then the routines that you're describing, and then sort of a reacclimation afterwards. I think, for me, I was already thinking about could a bubble take place months before the Disney World proposal came together. And I was hoping it would because I wanted the NBA to save the season. I didn't want it to just end in March 11th and everybody's like, well, we don't know the finish. It's like a book with no ending, right? And so I was very excited in the run up to the bubble, but I was also nervous and concerned from a health standpoint because I was living a super lockdown life here in Los Angeles. I mean, basically having everything delivered, going for daily exercise, but otherwise working completely from home, coming into contact with nobody, and really just, trying to avoid risk at all possible. And so for me, the idea of the bubble initially seemed like it was going to be pretty risky. There's players who could be the weak links. They invite someone into their hotel room, they go to a strip club when they're not supposed to. I mean, they're doing all these things, testing the rules and the boundaries. And so my concern was, am I going to be exposing myself to more risk? Now, the acclimation process actually took place more quickly than I think. And it was easier for me because I don't have children. And I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm driving a Ford. Like NBA players, a lot of them are family men, right? A lot of them are used to mansions and they're used to lots of cars and they're used to flying to games in helicopters like a Kawhi Leonard. And so I think that they actually had a little bit more of a culture shock experience than I did, in part because my day-to-day is driven by writing and podcasting, two very solitary acts that haven't changed a ton, if we're talking about life in the pandemic. So once I got down there situated, I felt pretty good. But coming back out of the bubble was surprisingly challenging because we had followed so many rules. We had been forced to, right? I mean, there's a big brother element to all of this. Security apparatuses monitoring our behavior, tracking us at every movement, right?
Yeah.
And then you just get dropped into the Orlando airport where people are wearing masks, but they're kind of not wearing masks. Florida's kind of been the wild, wild west in terms of the pandemic the whole time.
Florida.
Nobody cares about the social distancing stuff nearly as much as we did in the bubble. And it struck me like I actually got into the TSA line, and for whatever reason, they decided they had to pat me down. And I was like, I haven't been touched by another human being basically in 3 months. And then here's this guy whose entire job is to touch other humans. He's probably had more social contact in 1 hour during his normal job than I've had in 3 months. So there were some moments like that where it was very surreal, but I look back on the entire experience fondly, and I tried to capture it as thoroughly as possible. And so for me, yes, it was surreal. Yes, it was a once in a lifetime experience, but it's also something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And hopefully that comes through in the book. I want this to be a very thorough, kind of reflective account of this experience, not only in America, but specifically in the NBA.
Nice. So during your course of being in the bubble, and did you go into it with the idea to write a book about the process, or did that just kind of come about while you were sequestered in your hotel room thinking about everything that was going on?
No, I went into it just trying to stay safe, man. Like when I got on that flight, I didn't get my health clearance until less than 24 hours before I was flying to Orlando, my final health clearance. So it was a nerve-wracking experience all the way up into the end. So I was just trying to figure out, how do I get from point A to point B? I mean, the travel prices were so low. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to travel as if I'm like a superstar because it's 75% off. And that's the best way to like make sure that I'm safe, right? So I had a first class seat. I don't usually do that. I had a black car waiting for me at the airport. I don't usually do that. I stayed a night at the Ritz-Carlton before they let me check in, just so that I was trying to convince myself, hey, everything's going to be okay. You're living this life of luxury. And, it was wild that, the prices at that point, because just nobody was traveling for obvious reasons. Right. Yeah. Once I got there though, the amount of interest was just absolutely insane. I was hearing from people all over the world. A lot of the questions were like, do you think you're going to die? Is this thing going to work? Yeah. What happens if players get sick? And, there was no other sports going on really. And so this was sort of like the test case scenario for life during a pandemic, but also the return of professional sports, something that a lot of people have missed, right?
Mhm.
And so I was writing a few essays at the start of the bubble that were just getting a lot of traction. A lot of people were reading it. We had it on the front page of the Washington Post website. And I heard from an agent and a publisher within about 2 or 3 weeks of me being down there saying, like, this is a book, we like your stories, give us a proposal, let's figure it out. So after about a month into the process, I knew I was going to be doing it, and I was really gung ho about it. I was so excited at the opportunity to watch basically every playoff game I possibly could while I was down there. And so I felt like the right person to document it in my own eyes, of course, and I'm sure other people will as well, and they have. But it just seemed like this is a natural project. I'm already down here. I care so much about the sport, and I've been covering the protest angle, the business angle, the public health angle for the Post already. So let's just put this thing together. And it came together quickly, and I wrote it quickly as well. I mean, it was basically 2-month fever dream of writing, 5 hours every single night to get the first copy of the manuscript done, and then a lot of editing after that. But I didn't pre-plan it by any stretch. I would never go back and rewrite that history, because I went down there with a face shield thinking like, oh my God, like, am I going to be able to survive?
I mean, to your point about it being like a test case, I mean, who would have known that if a country or if just like a group of people were to isolate themselves and test regularly, right, and stay safe, that you could stop the spread of the virus? And I think that that's something that, I mean, a lot of us who were here in the U.S. during the time saying, wow, it's too bad that we didn't do something that looked like this a lot sooner, and just to see it work was pretty extraordinary. I had one more question to your point, too, about kind of trying to stay safe. I think that you had talked about early on the routine of getting tested regularly, and like that maybe there was some anxiety that came with those first couple tests, like what's it going to come back? But then after a while, wasn't it like kind of comforting, I think you were talking about, to know that you were being tested all the time?
But the testing thing was fascinating because, I had never been tested before I got down to the bubble, right? So the first couple of times you're thinking, well, like, hey, I've been very isolated, so I'm probably okay. I don't have any symptoms. I'm probably okay. But I did just fly cross country, and we didn't really know exactly how does airflow work in the airplanes. And, these little measures I thought I was taking, that's no guarantee. I mean, you're still potentially at risk, right? Mm-hmm. And so the first couple of tests, they were also really intense because we were locked into our hotel room for a week-long quarantine. So it was my only social contact of the day was people coming up basically in hazmat suits to stick Q-tips up my nose. I mean, that's a lot, right? I mean,
straight out of a horror movie.
Right.
I remember you pacing around your room just to get exercise. Like, that's just...
Absolutely. No, it was full lockdown, right? And so for me, though, the real peace of mind came once we got the results from the players' tests, because that's ultimately that's a much wider sample, right? So again, I'm thinking I can control my health pretty well, just stay isolated from just about everybody. We've got 350 players here. They're playing in games, they're practicing, they're in scrimmages. We got about 2 or 3 weeks into the process, and there was still no positive tests. And I said, you know what? All these protocols are really intense, but they're working. And that was really the peace of mind. But then there was another wave of feelings, and that was guilt, because we're sitting here getting these tests every single morning, just walking in, no line. Usually at most you would wait 5 minutes, right? In and out, you have the results emailed to you within like 16 hours. So you'd get it done in the morning. You would know by the night before you went to bed what your latest result was. They would do that every single day. How many places in the world at that point, and how many places in the United States, especially in July, had that level of testing access? Very, very, very few, right? And so to me, I was like, well, do I even need this? I'm relatively young. I'm healthy. I am isolated. I'm following all the best guidelines. There are so many frontline workers, other people who couldn't get tests, and yet I had to take them because otherwise I couldn't stay in the bubble. So there was a lot of emotional roller coasters going along with that. But I would just also note, the protocols were nuts, man. We were getting tested every single day. We were doing, and I should say nuts in a good way, because again, they worked, but they were just very intense. We're filling out health questionnaires every single morning. We're taking our temperature every morning. We're doing our blood oxygen level every morning. We're wearing a device around our neck that beeps if we get too close to people, like a smoke detector almost. I had a tracking ring that would take my temperature in real time. I had a wristband that was my electronic key code to my room, but also to other facilities in the campus. So they knew exactly where I was at every moment. And then they also had 4 layers of security: Disney security, NBA security, local police, sheriff's deputy. And by the way, video surveillance too, all over the campus, and a closed campus. So you can't, I mean, you could walk out right by the cops if you wanted to, but you're not getting back in, right? So, and there was no transportation. You know, we couldn't drive anywhere. You know, you couldn't go to a store. I brought $400 cash with me, and I think I brought like 260 home. The only money I spent down there was to get my hair cut the entire time because there was nowhere else to spend money, right? So this is the kind of rigorous, regimented lifestyle we were living, and that's how you can keep thousands of people all negative. You know, that's how you do that.
Last little question before we pivot over to talking about the Blazers. But what's it been like for you to go from basically being like as a writer, being the person who conducts these interviews, to now being on this fun little book tour? What's the weirdest part for you about that little switch?
Well, look, I mean, ultimately, this was a passion project for me. I poured, 8 months of reporting into it, and then basically 3 or 4 months of writing. So I'm actually loving it because this is probably the project in my entire life where I've had the most creative control over. I had awesome editors, but they really turned me loose on this one. And it's a memoir, in a way. It's my own personal first-person journey through this experience. And so just to be able to talk about it's been fun. It's obviously been very, very exhausting. But I've been, pleasantly surprised by the amount of interest in this project. Look, the bubble captured everybody's imagination last summer. And I think a lot of people realize like there needs to be a time capsule account of this thing. Because if you're a basketball fan 20 or 30 years from now and you hear, wait a minute, LeBron won a title at Disney World. How did that happen? Like, what is that even all about? Right. This book is that answer. Right. And I think I bring it through pretty clearly, hopefully, and pretty crisply in terms of just focusing on the minor details of the experience to kind of paint the broader picture. But no, I appreciate guys like you having me on to talk about it because this was a year of my life. There's no other way to look at it. I mean, that's really what I've been up to ever since the pandemic started.
Yeah, I'll say too, I have my book finally now on order from Powell's. I would encourage anyone to please support your local bookstores if you can in getting this book and go out and get it immediately. So with that, I'll give it back to Ryan to talk about the Blazers.
Oh, I'm apparently then I just went Amazon. I gave the big corporation more money.
Honestly, either way, it's
Look, I'll take it all, and I'll take your reviews too. People have been saying some really nice thing in those Amazon reviews. It's amazing what a little compliment can do, especially when you spent so much time on a project. So I love Palace. Man, I miss Palace. Honestly, like I almost flew home this week just so I could buy the book at Palace because I grew up in Palace, man. I mean, that's just hundreds of hours of my life in that bookstore. And every time somebody visits from, my family's from the Midwest. Anytime family would visit, it's like the first stop. We got to show you this bookstore that's as big as a city block, and
for sure.
So to me, that's a point of pride. I can't wait to get back up there.
So, talking about the Blazers a little bit, there was a couple things that we wanted to ask you, at least in regards to like the national perspective of the Blazers and how they're doing. One of the things that kind of blew up lately, obviously, that piece from in the Athletic from Shams and Sam Amick saying that Stotts is the number one coach on the hot seat, and apparently that was shocking to a lot of people in the national landscape. It seemed. Is any of that was any of what they were talking about in that article? Did any of that shock you or take you by surprise, or has the writing kind of been on the wall so far as this season has progressed?
Well, I like to stay in touch with a lot of the thinkers in the Blazer community for sure, and I've been hearing a lot of bubbles, for the last couple of months, just like, hey, is it time for a new voice? Where's this thing going? And I'm sure you guys saw Chris Haynes' story. Is Lillard having the proper amount of help? And I think it's a real question in terms of ownership's commitment at this stage. It's like, all right, well, this was Paul Allen's baby for decades. Is it Jody Allen's baby, or is it she just sort of like, kind of carrying this thing along? And I think this summer is going to reveal a lot of answers there, right? I mean, I think if Paul Allen was still the owner, he would probably look at the situation and say, hey, we've kind of hit a wall. We need to shake it up. Maybe the core group's not working, and maybe it's just time for a different coach. Does Jody feel the same urgency? Totally open question. It's very difficult to get a read on her priorities as an owner over these last couple of years because it's been so much about just rolling things over and trying to extend this window and just cycle the pieces around that main group. In terms of the national reaction, I think the reason why you might see some surprise is because of a healthy respect for Terry Stotts. I mean, he's a classy professional, no matter what you want to say about him. He's been around the NBA for a long time. I think a lot of people who don't follow the Blazers day in and day out would say, like, he hasn't had that much to work with. He's been dealt a really tough hand with injuries over the years. He's absolutely maximized his best player, Damian Lillard, put him in a position to succeed.
Preach.
And they made the playoffs, 7 or 8 straight years. And so a lot of people would say, well, like, what do you really want from this guy if you're constantly giving him these new free agents, or you're trading a Gary Trent Jr. so you don't have to pay him? Like, that's not a coaching decision, right? And so I think that's probably where the disconnect comes from. Also, people just sleep on the Blazers, man. Like, that's part of it too, It's like every year when they're in that 6 or 7 seed, it's like, oh yeah, Portland, they're doing their thing again. Dame's going crazy, kind of float him into the MVP conversation. And that's just kind of the end of it. And look, that's been a lifelong struggle, at least in my entire life. The Blazers have never quite gotten that top billing compared to some of these other teams. And so that's probably where the surprise factor comes from.
And like, look, I know that Terry Stotts is not the best coach in the NBA, but I think it's always interesting to get someone's perspective who covers the entire NBA, because I don't feel like you can really evaluate any one coach unless you're looking at all of them. So sometimes I think if you're only focusing on the Blazers, and I'm guilty of this, you get a little bit myopic just on that team and there's nothing to compare them against. If you were to try to peg, in your view, and look, I mean, you're super familiar with the team and you cover them for a long time. If you were to peg where Terry Stotts is in the hierarchy of NBA coaches, would you say that he's a great coach, above average, or not very good, or like one of the worst coaches in the NBA? Like, where would you put him on a simple scale like that if you had to?
No, I mean, I would have him in that top 10 to 15 range. Look, there's some real questions about, okay, defensively, is he one of these coaches where like the team is just consistently rough on that end because of his philosophical values or because of a lack of talent? I would tend to say, a lack of defensive talent has held him back a lot, but I think he's deserved a lot of the credit he's gotten as an offensive thinker. I don't really know how he could have managed Damian Lillard's career better. And ultimately in the modern NBA, this is one of my new talking points. We used to talk about players. Are they coachable or not coachable? Now we need to flip it around because the stars have all the power. So when it comes to coaches, are they playerable or not playerable? In other words, are they going to be able to like reach players with massive egos and gigantic contracts and still connect to them and still get the top maximum effort and buy-in out of your star level players? That's most of the job in today's NBA. And Lillard has sworn by Stotts throughout his entire career. He's stood up for him multiple times when the hot seat stuff has picked up. And so to me, that's a great sign of respect. He's just got that, that calm and quiet swagger that some coaches lack, and
well, I mean, look at what's happening in Indiana right now, right? Like to your point about not being able to connect with players.
Right. Great example of a coach who is not playerable, and he won't be a coach at the end of the season. He's right. He's probably going to be an assistant coach. And so that's why I would say, I mean, there's a lot of younger coaches, less experienced coaches, less creative offensive coaches compared to Terry. I'm not going to say he's like a top 5 draft pick if you're picking from the coaches, but I think he's solidly in that 10 to 15 range. You don't make 7 straight playoff appearances with a bad coach. I'm sorry. You just don't. It's so hard to do, especially in the Western Conference, especially when you're in a smaller market where when you've got those 2 big contracts, it really hampers how you build around those guys. And, I think that Stotts has survived some really tough times. And I think that, I mean, if he does get let go this summer, if they part ways, he better do that with his head held high, and I'm sure he will, because I don't really see a bunch of coaches out there who would have gotten better results.
So you were around the organization during its last coaching search, and I think you were still local around that time, weren't you?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Caleb Canales is my guy, man. He's definitely the interim coach. Everybody remember? Do you remember when he won that first game against Chicago? And it was
we wanted to hire him right then. Just make it full time. Let's keep it rolling.
He's a great guy, and he's still doing his thing now. He's with Indiana right now as well. But it was a surprise when they grabbed Terry, wasn't it?
Yeah, and kind of on that, obviously, Blazer fans, we love going absolutely crazy. So everybody now somehow thinks that the Brinks truck is going to show up to Spoelstra's place and get him to come back home, or that we'll finally be able to nag Becky Hammond away from the Spurs. Those are all unrealistic goals, correct?
Well, you're not going to get Spoelstra. I mean, look, he's a Heat lifer. I think he's liking life down there in South Beach pretty well, and he's had a lot of success there. And I think that it's one of those situations with Spoelstra where, like, he just found the ideal mentor in Pat Riley, and he was given a large, wide berth to kind of succeed and to grow as a coach. And he just learned at the feet of a great. And, that goes deep. I don't think you're going to be able to snag him. Becky's an interesting name because I think that she's been on the radar as a head coach for a while, and somebody eventually is going to give her a shot. It's more a matter to me of when, not if. And that's a nice turning point for the league, because you go back 5 years when she was first kind of getting into the summer league stuff, there was much more pushback or like just kind of hesitation about, oh, could she really do it? I think at this point, people have gotten over that and that she's going to get a real shot to do it. I'm not sure where Portland would go with this hire. It's another thing to track because of the pandemic. Coaching salaries vary widely. Like super experienced, very well-regarded coaches make a lot of money, right? And you've seen some teams like Oklahoma City, for example. They part ways with Billy Donovan, bring in a first-time coach. They're saving a ton of money on that, right? And so if you're cost conscious here during the pandemic, it's a great way to get cost savings. We saw Houston do the same thing. They let Mike D'Antoni go. They bring in a first-timer in Steven Silas. I mean, you're potentially saving like 80, 85% on the salary by going with the young coach. Mm-hmm. That's a real incentive for these organizations that are kind of looking at their bottom line and saying, where can we trim here and there? If you do give a first-time, you get like a long-time assistant coach his first shot, that could be some new energy, and that could be a win for your roster, but it could also potentially be a win for your owner as well. And in terms of cost savings, another guy to watch on that, Scott Brooks in Washington. He had a really nice big contract he's coming to the end of. Do they give him a new deal, and are they going to pay up for that, or are they going to go a different direction? That's kind of a fair question to ask. We saw it in Sacramento too with Luke Walton. They don't want to fire him because they didn't want to have to pay two coaches simultaneously. So I would say follow the money on Portland's hire. If they get a prominent assistant coach or a coach who has been a head coach previously, that's a great sign of Jody Allen's commitment. That will mean a lot. If they get somebody who you've never heard of, okay, that's going to signal that she's tightening the belt a little bit.
All right. Ben, don't want to take up too much of your time, so we thank you very much for joining us. Go ahead and let everyone know, again, where they can find your book and find you and follow you and everything you got going on.
Well, I'm writing all the time over at WashingtonPost.com/sports, and I'm on Instagram at Ben.Golliver. The book is in bookstores right now, Barnes & Noble, Powell's. Like Brandon mentioned, you can get it on Amazon like you did. And pretty much anywhere else you get your books, you can find it. So it's Bubbleball, inside the NBA's fight to save the season.
All right. Thanks, Ben.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you again to Ben Golliver. It is always awesome to have him on. And yeah, just really appreciate his time. Please do check out Bubbleball. Grab that book, whether it's from a local bookstore or from somewhere else, just get that. And I think that's about it for today's show, Ryan. Let me put you on the spot. If people wanted to connect with our podcast, how might they do that? And again, I have not given you any prep for this. I'm not sure if I even given you all the logins to the emails and stuff, but let's just see what you do off the top of your head.
What I do off the top of the head. Do we have an email?
We do. It's weliktheblazers@gmail.com. You can also find us at weliktheblazers.com. You can find me at Goldner PDX, and we would appreciate your reviews, ratings, and subscriptions. So I'll bail you out there. Yes, it's both. Just weliktheblazers.com and weliktheblazers@gmail.com. But where the hell could people find you if they wanted to find you and bother you online?
You can find me at the Witty Ryan. That is with two T's, WHITT. When I came up with that name, I didn't think of the fact that a lot of people would take that as the Whitey. So
you are rather white. Let's be honest about that.
Hey, I'm fairly tan. I got this stupid ring light that makes me look a little more pale. But
I
yes,
think we're both pretty white. Even when we're tan, we're still really white.
Yeah, but it's one of those weird things. You don't pick your nickname. It was a nickname that was given to me. I just roll with it. But yeah, it's kind of hard to, when you write it out, you're like, oh, the Whitey, and I'm like, God, that does not play well today.
You can, if you want to, you can change your Twitter handle. I had to do that actually for the show. So yeah, if you want to change it, you can. But I think it's fine. It rhymes with your name, and it also is kind of like, it's like witty, like you are witty. I think it's fine. I think it works.
Yeah. Again, so you can find me there. Please don't stalk my house and yell how stupid my Blazer takes are outside my house. So don't come there. Other than that,
go to Ryan's house and hand deliver him his mellow apology form for him to be filled out in triplicate before the end of the season. All right, Ryan, appreciate you. Thanks again to Ben. Thank you to all of you. And yeah, see you soon, and go Blazers.
Go Blazers.